Hello and welcome to an introduction to Autodesk Fusion. Now this introduction is really meant to be a very broad strokes introduction. We're going to talk about some of the basic functions of Fusion. We're going to talk about some of the different tools that you can use, the different workspaces that you can work in, how to navigate in Fusion, where to save your files and things like that. There are a lot of different ways to use Fusion. There's a lot of different things you can use it for. And depending on your goals, you may be using Fusion for a different thing, and you may be using a different set of tools than another person. That being said, all of the basics are going to kind of be the same. So why don't we get started? So one of the first things I think is important to note is that Fusion is different than other design software in that it is cloud-based. So what that means is that Fusion oftentimes requires a internet connection. And in order to access your files, which will all be saved on the cloud, you have to have an internet connection. And there is a button up here in the top right. Looks like a little clock, and if you click on it, it shows you your online status, whether you're working online or not. It is possible to turn this off and to go in offline mode, and you can do that for about 30 days before you have to kind of turn it back on. And turn it on now, but it's good to just kind of have it on because once you save your files, it'll automatically save them to the cloud, and everything will be kind of like safely stored for you. Fusion will also update very often, every week, sometimes every couple of weeks. And that update will show up here in this area as well. And you will have to periodically download the new version and update Fusion. So Fusion is kind of always changing, which is kind of good because it's always improving. One of the really nice things about the fact that it's cloud-based is that it is not computer specific. So you can be working on your Fusion on one computer, and you can switch to another computer, and as long as you log into your version of Fusion, use your login credentials, all of your files will be accessed from that new computer. So it doesn't need to travel with the computer, but it can travel. It just kind of stays in the cloud. So to access your files, we're going to click on this 3x3 grid in the top left corner, which is the data panel, and it opens the data panel here. And the way that the data panel is organized is with projects. So if you haven't made any projects yet, there may not be anything here, and you may have to make a new project. The project is really kind of like the overarching kind of like root folder to kind of start your organization. Once you open a project, like I'm going to open this CNC Beginner's Guide project, it has all of the files. Well, there's folders here, and these folders are associated with different parts of my project. Inside of the folders are going to be different files. So that's kind of like how you organize in Fusion. So it's very important to stay organized. Let's close the data panel with the X button right here. And let's take a look at the workspace. So if we click on the design up here, which I think is the default workspace, we have all the different workspaces that are available in Fusion. And depending on the type of subscription that you have, you may see different things here. The design environment is very common. It's going to be used for doing all kinds of CAD modeling, so 3D computer-aided design. It's going to happen in the design environment. There's generative design, which we're not really going to go over that much yet. Renderings, where you make photorealistic images of 3D models. The other one that we're going to use a lot, at least in this channel, is manufacture. And manufacture is where you're going to kind of create tool paths and things for CNC machines. And the reason that we are going to kind of focus on those two areas is because this channel is really in support of this book. And this book is CNC Beginner's Guide, CAD, CAM, and Machining that I wrote. And this book references these videos, and these videos reference this book. So they kind of work together. And this book is really about how to draw CAD files, work with CAD, and then also how to program toolpaths for use in CAM, for use in kind of programming CNC machines to move and to make things. So let's get back to Fusion and let's talk about the design environment. So there'll be a separate video that talks more, it goes into more detail about the design environment, and then there'll be another video that goes more detail about the manufacturer environment. But let's start in the design environment because I think it'll help us understand kind of what some of these different tools do. So first thing let's do is let's actually just make a shape, because I think it's easier to describe how all this stuff works if there's an object in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sketch by this with this create sketch button right here. Then you select a plane, doesn't matter, you can kind of select any plane right now. And now we're going to draw a two-dimensional shape, and then we're going to extrude it into 3 dimensions and make it a 3-dimensional object. So I'm just going to make a cylinder for now. So to do that, I'm going to make a circle. So under create, there's circle, and you can choose different types of circle. Notice that next to where it says center diameter circle here, there's a C, and that means that that's the hotkey for kind of getting to drawing a circle quicker. You just type C on your keyboard. So I'm going to select center diameter circle, and then it prompts me to select a starting point. So I'm going to select the origin. You can see the origin here as where this green line and this red line intersect, and it has this kind of circle at the very center. And notice that in Fusion, if you get close to like important points, and in this case the only kind of important point on this entire screen is the origin, that the crosshairs kind of lock in on that point, so that you can kind of root your circle at that point. So I'm going to wait till it locks in on the center there. I'm going to click once and then kind of drag away. And I can enter a number now on the keyboard, or I can click and then no number specified. One thing that I could do now here is I can set the dimension of it. I can set the dimension of it after the fact. So notice that all of these tools up here changed. When I was in the solid environment, there are a different set of tools, which we're going to go back to in a minute. But once you make a sketch, all of the tools that are available up here turn to tools that are you would use in 2D kind of geometry creation, right? So that makes sense. You don't want any like 3D geometry tools up here when you're working in a 2D environment. So that's kind of a nice thing about Fusion. It kind of works like that, where you don't have all the tools available to you all the time, but depending on like the context of what you're doing, the most relevant tools will kind of become available. So I'm going to give this circle some geometry. I'm going to click on the sketch dimension right here, or notice that the hotkey is D. And I'm going to click on the circle itself and then pull that away and click. And I can give it a number. I'm just going to give it 3 inches. Now, you may not be in inches. The reason that I'm in inches is because I work in inches a lot. It's my default units. One thing that you may have to do is you may have to change the units in your document settings. So to do that, notice that right now I have this sketch dimension tool kind of like activated so that it's trying to dimension other things. And I can see because there's a little icon right next to my pointer mouse. I want that to go away. So I'm going to hit escape and it'll go away. And now I can select things without it trying to dimension them. So if I go to document settings here, click the arrow next to document settings, I can see my units are inches. If I click on the little icon that pops up when I hover over in units, it says change active units. I can click on that. And then I can change units to one of these options. So I'm going to leave it in inches and click OK. And then if you want to adjust a dimension that you've already set, you can double click that number and then you can change it again. I'm going to change it to 3. Okay, so I'm going to finish that sketch. And here's the other thing that I'm doing is that I can move around in Fusion, whereas before there was nothing in this space here, so I couldn't actually kind of navigate. So I'm going to talk about how I navigate. So there's basically three different things that in combination can let you kind of move around and see this at a variety of angles and positions. And that's going to be pan, which is that, left, right. Zoom, which is zooming in, zooming out. And orbit, which is orbiting around. So in order to, before we do that, actually, let's make this in the 3D object. I think it might make it a little bit easier to understand this. So the really kind of basic way of making a 3D object from a 2D object is an extrusion. So that's under Create and Extrude, or the hotkey is E. I'm going to select, it automatically selected that geometry for me, but I could, deselect it here and then reselect another geometry or that same one. And I'm going to make this, 3 inches long. So we have a cylinder that's 3 inches in diameter and 3 inches long. And click OK. Okay, so navigating. Let's talk about how to move around. Notice at the bottom here, we have actually these different options for zooming, orbiting, and panning. So you can, if you want to, click once on the pan, say, and now the active tool is the panning tool. So if I click, I can move around, and I'm just panning now. So regular left click is pan. If I click on the orbit button, then regular left click is orbiting around. And if I click on the zoom button, if I hold down the left click and move up and down, I can, or left or right. No, it's really up and down. I can zoom in or out. But it is a little bit cumbersome to have to click on one of these each time you want to kind of change the type of moving you want to do. So there are special ways of doing it. I'm going to hit escape to deselect the orbit tool. So if you have a 3-button mouse, that's a mouse that has 2 clickers and a 1 roller in the middle. If you use the roller, you roll the roller, you're zooming in and out. And really 3-button mouse is kind of crucial for doing 3D design and this kind of stuff. It is possible to say, like, use the trackpad on your laptop to do zooming and orbiting and things like that, but it is kind of hard on your hand, I found. So I think a nice mouse, a 3-button mouse, really goes a long way. So if you roll the roller, you are zooming in and out. If you push down on the roller button, because it's a button itself, you pan. And then if you hold shift on your keyboard and then you hold down the middle mouse button, you can orbit. So this is a way of, I just kind of, usually when I'm navigating Fusion, I just hover my finger over the shift button, and then I kind of work my way. I can kind of do all my navigating, panning, zooming, and orbiting right there. So that's kind of like a lot of how you'll navigate. So not everybody's Fusion will be set up to move like that with that kind of specific combination of buttons and keys to do that orbiting, but you can change that in your preferences. So why don't we take a second to look at our preferences and see where we can change that. To get to your preferences, you're going to go to the top right, and you can see there's a little circle with your name and maybe your photo, and you can go down to click it and then go down to preferences. And then we get this dialog box, and we have all these different options on the left here, and then we have specific settings and preferences on the right. So this first one right here is preferences. It says controlling general UI behavior, and this is where you can set what pan and orbit and things like that mean. So pan, zoom, and orbit shortcuts, right now they're Fusion. So if it's set to Fusion, then it should be the same as I was doing before. But there are different types, especially if you're used to working with a different type of software. You can come here and you can change it so that, the way that you navigate is more similar to a different type of software. But I'm going to leave it as Fusion because that is what I'm used to. There are a bunch of different other settings you can change here. I would recommend not really changing anything unless you know exactly what it is. If you did change something and you want to change it back, you can always hit this Restore Defaults button at the bottom left here, and that'll kind of bring it back to the defaults. Okay. Another thing that we can look at here for kind of navigating the visual space in Fusion is looking at the view cube. So the view cube is this top thing on the top right here. It's a cube, and it has different words on different sides of the faces. And as you orbit around, you can see the view cube is actually changing orientation as well. So I find that I use the view cube a lot, especially to get views of an object from the side, things like that. So if you click on, say, top on the view cube, the letter top, or the side that says top on it, you can click on it and it'll give you a side view of that object directly from the top. And then there's all these different arrows here. If I click on another arrow on the side, it'll rotate it 90 degrees. Now I have a view of the front. If I click on that one again, I can rotate it 90 degrees and I have a view of the bottom. And then now I have a view of the back. And if I click on the side, I can have a view of the left, and now the front, and then a view of the right. If I want to change the orientation, like flip that view, I have these arrows up here on the far right, and I can click it and it'll rotate it around and rotate it the other way. I can also get a view from kind of an angle. So if I say click on the corner of this cube, I get an isometric view from that side. And if I click on another corner, it flips around, I get an isometric view from that corner. I can click on an edge and get a side kind of corner view from that edge, and I can move around like that. So lots of different ways of getting really specific views right here. Now we'll notice that something is happening here when my view is changing between a not straight on view and a straight on view. And that has to do with this kind of shift between perspective view and orthographic view. So let's talk about what that means. If you go down to the bottom here under display settings and you go to camera, we have three different options. There's orthographic, perspective, or perspective with ortho faces, which is my preferred viewing type. So if we go to orthographic, so what orthographic basically means is that if there are certain geometries that are true, absolutely true about this this shape, then they will stay true no matter what angle I'm looking at it from. I know that that's maybe not the best way to describe it, but kind of like how I can say it is that if this face and this face are parallel to each other, those two planes are parallel to each other, then no matter what angle I'm looking at it from, they will always kind of like effectively appear visually parallel to each other. But, you know, and here's another way of describing it. This circle is 3 inches in diameter, and this circle is 3 inches in diameter. They'll always kind of take up that same space, no matter if one side's closer to me visually than another one is. So they'll both kind of maintain that same size. But this is not how objects behave in the real world. You'll notice in the real actual world, objects appear to get smaller the further away from you that they are. And that is essentially perspective. So what we can do here is we can change our display settings in the camera to perspective and watch the shift. I can see that the circle that's further away actually appears smaller. And if I do something like, if I say like highlight this back circle and I look at it, I can see the back circle there looks smaller now because it is further away. This is a more realistic way to look at objects. I think we're definitely more familiar with this way of looking at objects. So it is kind of nice to see your 3D objects like this. However, when you look at a side, you do have features like this where it's like both of the circles are different sizes. Also, if I pan to the side, I can see the edge now, and I can see that edge now. So sometimes it is actually really nice to be able to see something in orthographic view, so that you can see the kind of real absolute relative positions of the different geometries. And so that's what orthographic is really nice for. See, if in orthographic, both of these circles always have the same geometry. And sometimes that's useful. We'll get into when that's useful and why we would use that at different points. But for now, I'm going to leave the camera in perspective with ortho faces. I think that'll be the most useful. Okay. The next thing let's talk more about like kind of visual representations that we're looking at here. Right now we're looking at this object which is shaded, and it has these dark lines along the edges, which is one way to view, but there are different ways. So if I go to display settings again, I can go to visual style. Right now we're at shaded with visible edges only. But you can change them here. You can change it to shaded, and it takes away that visible edge. I can change it to shaded with hidden edges, and it shows the edge that's actually hidden by the surface of this object. On the other side, it shows it as a dotted line. I could also show it as wireframe, which is kind of like a see-through view, as if it was made of glass. And this is really nice, especially for seeing features that are inside of an object that are kind of otherwise hard to see. Visual style, wireframe with hidden edges, different things. So for now, and what I usually do is shaded with visible edges only, but just it's important to know that you can change to a different visual style if, depending on what you're doing, you need to see something that you're not seeing. You can do that. Okay. Other descriptions of kind of the visual field here. There's grid and snaps, and you can have a layout grid, which kind of gives you like a nice reference plane. And that's not always necessary. I actually don't really use this that much. But in some cases, and depending on your preference, it can be desirable. So I'm going to turn layout grid off. And snap to grid is another one where it's, I guess snap to grid is if you're making a sketch, say on this plane here, where you make your sketch, we'll have to, it will snap to the different grid points on that sketch. So sometimes that's useful, sometimes that's not so useful. I'm going to take that off, and you can make some other settings here that we're not really going to go over. Yeah. I'm going to finish this sketch just to get out of it. I'm just going to make a few more changes to this object so that we can see how the kind of history of this object is captured by Fusion. So I'm going to do some things in Modify. So I'm going to go to Modify, and I'm going to make a fillet first. So I'm going to click Fillet, and I'm going to take this top edge, and I'm going to make a fillet. I'm going to say give it a size of 0.5. Okay. And then I'm also going to go to Modify and Chamfer. And I'm going to chamfer this top edge right here, this other edge here, make it also 0.5. And click OK. Okay, so I've kind of, I've done a few things to this object. I started with a 2D drawing, I extruded it, and then I made a fillet, and I made a chamfer. And in Fusion, there's actually a place where all of that information is kind of like laid out in a very logical kind of way, and that is in the design history. So if I look at the bottom here, starting at the left, I have a kind of record of what I've done. You can click on the different parts of it, and it'll show you what it was. So that first thing I did was a 2D drawing of a circle 3 inches in diameter. And then what I did was I made this object here by extrusion. Then I made another drawing here, which it actually saved in the design history, but then I didn't do anything with it, but it still kind of stays there. Then I did the fillet right there, and I did the chamfer right here. So that can be good because sometimes, for instance, you want to like undo something that you did, or you want to kind of figure out how you got to where you were, and the design history really helps with that. Another thing that's really useful with it is that you can click on a feature on the actual physical body, and it'll highlight in the design history what made that feature or where that feature came from. So if I click on the fillet here, it shows me here the fillet. And what I can actually do is I can go to the design history and I can double click on it, I think. Yeah, I can double click on it and it brings up that feature again. It kind of takes you back in time to that point. See, it took that chamfer away because I had made the chamfer afterwards. And I can make changes to it. I can make it 0.6. So you can make adjustments to those features based on what happened in the design history. I can click back on this extrusion and I can make it, 4 inches instead of 3 inches. Things like that. So, with an object so simple like this, it's not that important, but once your objects get really complicated, it has lots of different features, this part becomes really useful. The other thing that I think we should talk about is the browser. Now the browser is up here on the left, and I can minimize it by clicking this little minus sign, or I can enlarge it by clicking the plus sign. And the browser is where all the information in my file is going to be stored. So there's these little arrows next to each object. If I click on that arrow, I have the document settings. Remember, we changed the units here. There's the views. There's the origin, which you can turn on or off if you want to see it or if you don't want to see it. Sometimes it's kind of visually gets in the way, especially when you get really far away from something. Also important to note, these little ovals next to each one of these objects means you can turn on or off the visibility of it. Then I have bodies, and this is going to be where all the bodies that I create can be seen and referenced. So that is, there's only one body in here, and that's body 1, and it's right there. And there's also a little eyeball next to it. I can turn the visibility of that body off or back on, or I can turn all the bodies visibly off. Then there's the sketches, and I made 2 sketches. One of them doesn't have anything in it, so it looks invisible, and that's sketch 2. I'm going to turn that one off. And there's sketch 1, which I can turn on, and that is the first sketch that we made. That was the 3-inch diameter circle. So, for different things that you're doing, it's going to be important to go back into the browser bar to look for specific things, to look for specific sketches, to look for specific bodies, to turn them visibility on or off, to make copies of them. That all kind of happens in the browser here. I use the browser actually very often. When you go to the manufacturer environment, the browser is going to look different, but it's going to kind of behave similarly. Okay, I'm going to turn this sketch off. And let's see, what else should we talk about? So one thing that I think is good is another thing you can use the design history for is you can, say if you wanted to take away a feature like that fillet right there, say I wanted to get rid of it. It'd be kind of hard to do that in any other way than to go into the design history and to kind of turn that feature off. And the way you do that is you can right click on that feature and you can do a couple things. You can roll the history marker here, which is actually kind of interesting. This marker will move back. You can move this marker back in time, and you can kind of go back in time through the different steps that you took to get where you got. But let's say that I have this big feature here, this body here with all these features on it, and I want to turn off that feature right there. If I click on it, I can see that it is highlighted here in the design history. I could right click on it and I can say suppress features. And if I do that, then it turns it off. If you right click again, I can say unsuppress features and it'll turn it back on. Usually it's very nice to capture design history, but if you're working on very large, very complicated assemblies or things like that, You may want to turn it off because it can kind of slow things down. But usually I just keep it on. Basically all the time I keep it on because it's very useful to have. You can change that though in the settings on the bottom right here. You could say do not capture design history if you want that. But I will leave that there. The last thing that we're going to talk about, at least in this video, we're going to get into kind of how to use all these different tools and how to do a variety of different 3D modeling through a series of projects. But really kind of like the last thing that I want to talk about here is the inspect button. The inspect button we're going to use in order to, well, the inspect section has a bunch of different tools in it. The measure tool is quite useful. So I'm going to click on the measure tool and I get this pop-up box here. And with this, I can measure the geometries of different objects. So if I click on this cylinder here, it'll tell me, let me expand this a little bit, the radius, the diameter, 3 inches, that's right. It'll tell me the area and the loop length. If I click empty space, it'll clear that selection, right? I can click on this smaller circle here. It'll tell me the diameter of that, 2 inches. Right here, sometimes it's useful to have, multiple units. And so what you can do here is you can turn on secondary units. Sometimes it's nice to know what the millimeter equivalent of something is. So I'm going to click empty space to clear it again, because the other way that this is very useful is finding the distance between objects, or distance between features, really. And so I could say the distance between, try and find the distance between this plane right here. So I click on that plane by itself, it tells me the area of the plane and things like that. If I click on another feature, it's going to tell me the distances between those two features. In this case, it shows the minimum distance and just distance, which are both 4 inches here. And that's because this was extruded out to 4 inches. So, it's you'll set all these geometries and things like that when you're setting up your file, but oftentimes you won't remember, or sometimes things will just kind of fall out. Certain geometries will just, or certain dimensions will just kind of result from the way things are, and it's good to kind of see what they are. Note that if I say click on this surface here first, and then I click on this surface here at the bottom, it's going to tell me the distance between. If I click on a third geometry, it's going to tell me the distance between the first geometry I chose and that new geometry. So everything is relative to the first geometry you select. If I select this geometry down here, it's the distance between the first geometry and that new geometry, and things like that. So if I click empty space, it'll clear it again, and I can start over. Distance between there and there, things like that. Okay, let's close the measure tool. And that is where we're going to leave it for now. There are a lot of other tools in Fusion. There's a lot of other things you can do in Fusion. But we're going to get to that kind of as we go, through the different projects that we do. We're going to learn how to use all these different tools. It would be, I think it's, showing what each tool does by itself in isolation isn't as important as showing what each tool does, like in the kind of support or pursuit of a different specific project. That's really where kind of it helps. And that's where this kind of, the way that this channel is structured. It's learning through doing, it's learning through projects. And if you go through these projects, they start from the project one is going to be, quite simple, and they're just going to kind of get more advanced from there. We're going to be doing the CAD for each project, and then we're going to be making toolpaths for showing programming a CNC machine to make that object. So yeah, that's the introduction to Autodesk Fusion video, and look around for the next ones in the series.